Hey, everybody, this is Bob Goodwin, and welcome to another episode of Career Club Live. If you happen to be watching us on YouTube, please feel free to like, subscribe, and add your comments. If you're listening to this as an audio podcast, please feel free to rate and review it. It really does help. And then wanted to just a quick shout out to today's broadcast is brought to you by our newest service called Next Placement, where we're bringing a more people-centric, empathetic approach to outplacement. So if you're an HR professional and you're faced with the task of having to transition colleagues from the company and are looking to providing career transition services, we'd really encourage you to take a look at Career Club and Next Placement. You can find more on this at career.club. I'm very excited about today's guest. He was recommended to me by a mutual friend, and as we got to know each other and I learned more about his body of work, Mike Foley really is doing some incredible things. So he's got a wonderful background, which I'm going to read mostly here because it's quite extensive. So Mike Foley is the founder and CEO of Clarity Central, a consulting firm specializing in communication skills. He's also a clinical assistant professor at Northwestern University's Kellogg School of Management. His ability to connect with an audience by sharing insights and humorous stories has been at the core of his success as a corporate trainer and public speaker. Prior to Clarity Central, Mike was in the business development role at General Electric. He holds a BS in engineering, an MA in human development, and an MBA. In 2014, he was recognized by the National Speakers Association as a certified speaking professional, the highest international recognition for professional speakers. Suffice it to say, Mike Foley is a communications expert, and that is what we're going to talk about today. So with that, Mike, welcome.
Hey, Bob, how you doing?
I am doing fine. We're so glad to have you here. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Awesome. So where do we find you today?
I'm back in Chicago. I've been traveling a lot, so just got back, and the weather is beautiful. Finally, summer's here, and boy, it's a long winter, but it's finally we've got the good weather today.
I was going to say Chicago tends to skip spring. It kind of goes from blizzards to blistering without much of a break in between.
I noticed that. I've been wearing my winter coat up until about a couple of weeks ago.
Oh my goodness. So as is our want, we like to do just a little bit of an icebreaker to help people get to know you as a human being, not just a guru in all things communication. So very quickly, where were you born and raised?
I was actually born in California. My folks are originally from the East Coast, so we were out in California for 5 years, first 5 years of my life. Then we moved back to the East Coast, and then around high school, freshman year in high school, we moved to the Chicago area, and been in the Midwest ever since.
Awesome, very cool. And then just a little bit about your family.
Yeah, I come from a large Irish Catholic family. There was 6 of us, and everybody was telling stories all the time, and it was a very intuitive way to learn to speak and get your messages across. And if you didn't speak up, you just didn't have a place in my family of origin. So everybody was always trying to get the limelight. And I think through the years, through osmosis, I just figured out how to tell stories and to connect with other people via communication skills. And it was years later that I started studying exactly what I kind of picked up intuitively. So I kind of come from a background of big storytellers. So.
Well, this will be fun because I think, people would talk about the gift of gab and somehow like it's just a gift. And yet what we're going to talk about is, no, there's some structure to this. So there's definitely things that we can learn to be better.
We could do another podcast, Bob, on Blarney. So that's a whole nother.
I could do that by myself. I'm full of that.
Yeah.
And then real quickly, I know that you've got a really interesting hobby and pastime that you're getting ready to go embark on here very shortly. Do you mind sharing with folks what that is?
Yeah. So, growing by high school, growing up here in Chicago, my brother and I used to take our sunfish, which is like, a 10-foot, it's just basically a surfboard with a little cockpit. We used to go sailing on Lake Michigan. And I always had this thought, man, it would be so fun to cross an ocean someday. So, fast forward 40 years later, I depart June 6th from Portland. So a couple of weeks, we depart from Portland, Maine for the Azores, and then the Azores to Lisbon. And I've got a crew of 4, and we're all set up. And so it's been just a lifelong ambition of mine, and definitely needs some clear communication on board. So that
Oh
does
my
come in
goodness,
handy.
yes. So, super quick. So Portland, Maine to ultimately Lisbon, Portugal.
Actually, we'll stop in the Azores, which is part of Portugal. It's about 2/3 of the way across the ocean,
Okay.
so it about 2,000 miles, and then from the Azores to Lisbon, it's about another 900 miles.
Yikes. Okay. Well, thank you for the geography lesson along the way. And
Yeah,
about how long is that going to take you?
it's going to take us about 2.5 weeks for the first leg, and then just for 1 week for the second leg.
And then do you like resupply or whatever in the Azores, or can you make it
Yeah,
all the way?
yeah. So
Yeah.
I kind of counted on fresh food for about the first week, and then we'll be working on canned and food and pop that type of thing. So we'll
That's
be
super.
doing
That's very cool. So
good. Yeah.
to kind of jump into it, so you teach communication. I mean, it's your business at Clarity Central,
Yep.
and then you also teach this as an MBA level course at Kellogg, correct?
Correct. I was an engineer for a number of years for GE prior to getting involved in communication skills, and I just started noticing really, really smart people having a tough time articulating their ideas, my fellow engineers. And so I just started teaching communications courses at GE. I just did a couple, and they took off. And I thought, I really think there's a gap in the market for communication skills, real practical communication skills that people actually use. And so I started my own study on the topic. And it was just a few years later that I started my business, Clarity Central, and we've been going for 27 years now. And I didn't think I'd stay in communications. I just had no idea the depth of the need that was out there. So, I mean, it's every level can use it, and every function in an organization.
Well, let's just
Uh,
talk about that for half of a second, because
yeah,
on the one hand, it seems like just a super self-evident kind of thing, but
yeah.
it's not. And why, in your view, and what all you've learned in these past 25 plus years, why are communication skills so important? Why should people spend time investing in getting better at it?
I would say two things there, Bob. One is, over the years, I've defined professional power as in two ways. It's an equation. It's your intelligence, it's your vision, it's your business acumen, all of these things. So you got that piece, all of that. The other half of it, though, is your ability to get people on board with you, whether it's through, persuasion, motivation, inspiration, closing deals, selling products, services, ideas, collaborating. And you got to have both. When it comes down to it, the brilliant ideas, without this ability to get people, investors on board with you, without getting employees on board, without getting clients on board with that, your ideas aren't going to go anywhere. And so it's a very simple but very powerful equation, and you got to have both if you're going to really move the needle in our culture, any culture for that matter. You have to have both, and I think people focus on the first with not so much on the second. So we all know people that walk around with brilliant ideas, but they just can't quite make them a reality. So that's the gap in the market that I noticed, and I just thought, if I reverse engineered from that equation, what would I do to help people really enhance their communication skills so they could get more people on board with them? So I call that your professional power. And I think, a couple examples. One was Henry Ford, brilliant manufacturing process, right? He's pumping these things out. They're all black. There's no options, the Model Ts, right? The other side of the equation for him is he literally had to go out and persuade the horse and buggy crowd that this is a better buggy. And that's what he had to do. JFK, back in the 1960, he went to Congress and with a pipe dream of sending a man to the moon in 10 years. All right. And he persuaded them to give him $9 billion, not million, billion in 1960. And he didn't see it, but they achieved that within the 10 years. So those are just a couple of examples of professional power. And there's endless examples. I mean, I could go on all day with different. I'll give you one more. So, Bill Gates, he obviously a brilliant guy. His approach sometimes is a bit challenging, and so his pitch to IBM back in the day was rejected. They rejected his ideas. They said, thanks, Bill, but you can go. And as a result of that rejection, he started Microsoft, and he knew he would never have that other side of the equation. So what did he do? He hired his college roommate, Steve Ballmer, to be that sales face for Microsoft for all those years. So he knew he needed that balance. And so I think that's just something to consider. And, I always, when I put that assertion out there, I always say that I'm on pretty solid ground, because Warren Buffett says, invest in yourself. One easy way to be worth 50% more than you are in the marketplace is by investing in your communication skills. So I think, we're on the, if Warren Buffett's saying it, I think we're on safe ground.
You're probably on safe ground, yes. Yeah, it also reminds me of the book by Dan Pink, To Sell is Human, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's all about persuasion, to your earlier point,
It is.
because, whether we're parents or we're fighting for budget or with our significant other or whatever the relationship is, we're always persuading, someone, and again, not in a manipulative kind of a way, but genuinely like, honey, I think this is best. Let me help you see why this might be in your best interest to do something. But in any event, one of the things that you've shown me is that we're fighting for attention, that we've got a very distracted audience, if you will. Could you talk a little bit about just sort of level set where people are in their ability to even receive communication these days?
Yeah, I mean, so great question, Bob. So, I mean, it all comes down to connecting on that human level, and, backing up to what you just said about it's not about manipulation. It is absolutely not about manipulation. I mean, people see when they're being manipulated, and it's just so that what I try to get across is we're doing the opposite of that. It is absolutely not about manipulation. So it is about understanding, like really understanding your audience, and then make it easy for them in a lot of different ways. So the first thing I would say is when I dove in and I was working with some of my teaching assistants to do some research on what's going on with people out there in the marketplace right now. It's amazing. It's worse. People are so overwhelmed that they can barely hold a thought. They can barely listen for them. I guess goldfish have an 8-second attention span. The average person has like 7 seconds. So, I mean, it's scary.
We aspire to be goldfish.
Yeah, exactly. So, I mean, distractions. So before COVID, we were on screens, according to the Nielsen study. We were on screens like 10 hours a day. Post-COVID, we're on screens 14 hours a day. And I ask people, what's the first thing you look at in the morning? And they're like, my screen. And I'm like, what's the last thing at night? And they're like, my screen. So we're distracted by that all day long. You've got 10,000 ideas coming at you every day. You turn on a website, you instantly have 15, 20 things popping at you. And by the end of the day, I always ask my class, have you noticed how exhausted you are, even though you've just been sitting at a desk? And the reason for that is we have 10,000 ideas coming at us every single day. So, I can go on with a bunch of statistics, but basically people are overwhelmed and they're burned out and they just can't take anymore. So the question that I always pose to, my students is, if this is the reality, and we all agree at some level, because I show them all the statistics, how are you going to get through to people in 2023 if that is the reality?
Yes.
And I'm open to new ideas, Bob. And that's why I enjoy talking to you about this, because, anything to help people connect, given the amazing amount of information coming at people, how do you cut through that? And the one phrase that I really love is, communication is not what's said, it's what's heard. I'll say that again. Communication is not what's said, it's what's heard. So you can think of it like transmit and receive, and there's only communication if it goes through, if it connects. If it doesn't connect, there's no communication. And I always have fun with this. I say, so if you don't know what I'm talking about, how many people here have had a discussion with a significant other where you walk away from the conversation thinking, they heard something totally different from what I just said. And that's communication is not what's said. Something else is being heard. So that then the question is, well, what's the answer? How do you connect? And I would say, I really stop my class in their tracks when I say this. I say, this class has nothing to do with you. This class has everything, and I mean everything, to do with your audience. So if we work backward from what's most important for the audience, what does the audience really want from us? That is going to make all the difference in the world, especially given all of the distractions and the stress that people are under. So I say my answer to it is make it easy for people. How can you make it so easy for people to take in your information? And if you can do that, you're a breath of fresh air. And if you don't do that, you're just like everyone else trying to vie for somebody's attention when they've got 10,000 ideas coming at them.
You know, and you can correct me on this one. As you're talking, Mike, what kind of occurs to me is like if you just did a random survey and said, hey, which organ of your body do you think is most important for communication? People would probably say the mouth, right? Because you're talking. And as you're going through this, what it makes me, it's like, no, first it's your heart. Show me you actually care. The way that you can show me that you care is with your ears by listening. And then you're in a position to be able to connect with somebody because, to your point, you're now empathetic to where they're coming from. There's some demonstration of I actually care about what you need, not what I'm trying to do. And then people, the field has been prepared to be sown.
Spot on, Bob. Spot on. And I would say, I'm not a huge fan of a lot of the listening courses that I've taken over the years because you don't remember them, and there's some gimmicks and techniques. What I have found, Bob, is being curious. When you said care, curiosity is caring. If you think about it, you're taking all of your energy to try to. So say that again. Can you help me understand? And so what I say is, if you want to become a great listener, get very curious. Like, hey, back up. Tell me about your business. Really? No kidding. And what else is going on? And by getting curious, you're naturally going to listen very deeply of what's going on. And then when you do go to speak, you've developed credibility with the person. They get that you genuinely are trying to understand where their point of view. And then they're much more likely to listen. And then you can apply some of the things that we do go through in the course, like being organized and proving your points with evidence. And you weave those things in to make it easy for them to get on board with you. Then you're hitting on all cylinders, in my opinion.
Well, and what I love about what you're saying, Mike, with the curiosity is there's an inherent authenticity, a genuineness to that.
Can't fake that.
You can't fake this stuff. And so for anybody that's looking for a quick fix on how to just like, how can I like pretend like I care?
Yeah.
I don't know what that is, but I've never encountered it, and I hope I never do.
Bob, how many times, we both been in the sales field for years. So how many times have we been in situations where, the person asks 5 discovery questions, right? And they're not even recording it. Like they might write something down, but they're going to give you the same pitch regardless of your responses. And it's that inauthenticity that we pick right up on. And we're just like, they lose all credibility, in my opinion, in that moment, because they're just making me feel better that they asked me 5 discovery questions. They're not really genuinely curious about where I'm coming from.
Right. That is true. All right. So we've established that people are distracted and busy and overwhelmed with a ton of information, guilty as charged. Then, if we want to unlock that door, though, and have, some chance of being heard, what we're saying is the first key is be genuinely curious, listen, ask questions, demonstrate, that you've got a genuine interest in the other person. Assuming that foundation has been laid, how can you start walking us through a model that isn't just, oh, he's glib, she's got a silver tongue, but there's actually a method behind the madness to being a communicator?
Yeah, absolutely. Just finishing up with the curiosity part, Bob, I would say you can think of a few questions to get the conversation started, obviously, but if you're really curious and you're really listening, my next question is in your answer. And I pick up something that's interesting to me and I throw that back, and it creates for a very natural conversation. And does that make sense?
No, 100%, because I think the antithesis, and is pretty well acknowledged, is most people are sort of forming their next question while you're talking. So they're actually not listening to what you're saying. They're formulating their next statement, whether it's a question or a sentence.
Exactly. So that's how you get the conversation rolling. And then I would say, going back to Socrates and Aristotle, and the philosophers, they all stated that, we think in terms of threes. So it's major premise, minor premise, conclusion, logic 101. Syllogisms, it's before, during, after, beginning, middle, end, intro, body, conclusion. So the rule of three, at a very fundamental level, is a wonderful way to segment your ideas if you're trying to articulate your ideas in a very clear and concise way. I wouldn't recommend talking like that all the time, but when you really want to bring it, and I say, answer simple questions with just blurt out your answers, just be authentic. But when you really want to bring it and you really want to organize yourself for a more complex answer, the rule of three is a very, very powerful tool. And it's everywhere in our culture, from sports to entertainment to everyday life. You see it everywhere. Every single one of Steve Jobs' presentations that books are written about, he uses the rule of three. So if you can organize yourself a little bit, that makes it easy for us as an audience to track with you. So I would say that's just one way of organizing. Another is opposites, compare, contrast. You already used it once, Bob. So on one hand, on the other hand, that's a wonderful way to segment ideas. So if you can organize it, people, once again, it just makes for people to it's easier for them to track with you.
So Mike, on the rule of three, in Career Club, we have a weekly call with all of our members. And this last week, we were talking about networking. And we had a guest that came in, and she used the acronym AIR, AIR, to give people just a very easy model on how to network, and where it was advice, insight, recommendations. So when you're networking with somebody and I need a framework to sort of structure this call, she was saying, well, the idea is to either ask them for advice, for an insight, or a recommendation. And she put that under the acronym of AIR, and everybody just instantly gravitated to it and started repeating it back to her, because she just organized it into three easy buckets that people instantly grasped.
Yep. Absolutely. So, I mean, there's so many benefits on so many levels. A, it's super easy for us to do. B, it's super nice for the audience to be able to track with you when you segment ideas like that, because the last thing we want as an audience is a stream of consciousness where we just don't know where the beginning, middle, or end is. So those are just a couple of reasons, as I'm using it right now, why it is helpful. It just makes it easy. I just keep coming back to make it easy for the audience. And the rule of three is definitely something like that. I would say one other thing with that, and that is it's a loose structure. It's not a rigid thing, or it's not 20 points. So within the structure, there's enough room for you to be improvisational, tell a story, go off on an example, talk about something, and then you come back to. And secondly, so it's a very natural way of speaking and being organized and helping your audience track with you.
Yeah, well, if I could be empathetic, you even confirmed some of this for me when we were speaking previously. That's how I do these podcasts, is kind of in some basic chunky areas, but with freedom to move about. Because if it's overly scripted, I actually can't hear you because I'm too worried about following the script.
Yep. Absolutely, Bob. And in fact, that's one of the biggest, I would say that is the biggest challenge I have with my students in the MBA program and with, out there in the industry, is people are so attached to perfectionism that they memorize their talks word for word. They might get through the talk, but you're not going to have that human connection. So I always say, there's neuroscience behind what we're talking about. And so Bob, when you're saying you're memorized or you're reading, has anybody ever had a presentation read to them? And it's just a nightmare. And so when you're doing that, the synapses in your brain are firing here, and you can't connect with, your audience very well. However, on the other hand, when you're just over in this part of your brain, which the synapses are firing when you're just connecting with all sorts of people, but you're not necessarily, you're just kind of winging it. So we don't like that either. If somebody's just winging it completely versus somebody being very rote. So what's the answer? The answer is a combination, which is what you're talking about, Bob, is a loose structure, but within the context of that structure, go off on tangents, be yourself, be authentic, just talk how you're talking and, like you normally talk, but do it within something that's easy for us to track. That's the trick, the middle path, so to speak.
Well, I think that, and we could be talking about public speaking right now, doing a presentation, for the C-suite at your company or in front of a client, but things that would typically create a lot of stress in us, and a lot of anxiety because I need to perform. And what I have found, and would love your take on this, is that when I've got enough structure, to your earlier point, to kind of know what the beginning, the middle, and the end looks like, and therefore I can kind of find where I'm at on the map. That way I won't get lost. But I am not so wound up about being perfect, because that is a huge stress inducer for me.
Absolutely.
And I think it's for most people. It actually reduces my less content, but just enough structure actually makes me more relaxed than being like scripted for 10,000 words.
I could not agree more, Bob. Absolutely. So I always tell people, this structure, I know by the way, it's simple to understand. It's difficult to do. I'll say that again. Conceptually, very simple to understand. Rule of three, that's great. But to do it and to do it naturally is not always the easiest thing to do. That's why it does take a little bit of practice to get very good at this. One of the things I point out is that when you go off on a tangent and you're doing improv in the middle of your presentation, you're connecting with your audience, you got them, you've got this wonderful time going along there. And when you finish, the next thing you do is you say, and thirdly, and you go on with your talk, and as if you had worked that piece in completely and planned it. And in fact, it was very improvisational. So that's what we're looking to do.
Well, back on the point that you were making a moment ago about this is kind of easy to say, hard to do. The benefit of that for me, though, is it forces me to get my thoughts organized. And because I'm now invested in that organization of those thoughts, it's been internalized in me. And I'm less dependent on notes in a script because I've internalized sort of the through line, what's the narrative here?
Yep. And you want to be crisp, and I tell people, I do want you to practice. You do have to practice, no doubt, to the point where you're just crisp. You just know, when I see this slide, I do this, I do this, I do this. Next slide, I do this, I do this, I do this. But every time you give the talk, the words are a little bit different. What you've practiced, to your point, Bob, is the structure. And I always say, you can put threes within threes, and then with the threes within threes, you can flesh those out with statistics, facts, figures, charts, visuals, video, just go wild, but do it all within the context of something that we can track as an audience. I was working with an executive at a medical company, and she was going before the FDA, and she had like a 2-hour talk with 60 points. And when I got done with her, she still had a 2-hour talk, but it was broken down into threes. So it was all that information was just chunked into 3 main sections so we can track with what she was talking about.
Well, one last example that I'll give just on this threes, that for people that might be listening that are interviewing in job search and get the dreaded "tell me about yourself." One of the reasons that people ask that question, because it's very open-ended, it's There's not a right answer to it. It's but part of the test is communication skills. It's a wide
Yeah.
open question. How well can you communicate? And what we teach folks is, Mike, would it be helpful if I told you just a little bit about me personally, how that's played out in my career so far, and then how that's
Yep.
informed what I'm looking for? Would that be a helpful structure? Nobody's ever said no to that. But then now there's three. Let me tell you a little bit about myself, how that's played out in my career thus far, and how that's informing what I'm looking for and why I think I'd be a great fit here. And
Yep.
people are like, wow, that was cogent. It was compelling. It's convincing. And
Yep.
people gravitate to that. So it's a very broad use case for your rule of three that a lot of people will need at some point in their career, of just being able to answer a very simple question. Tell me about yourself.
Yeah, absolutely. And then you could also, it doesn't have to be rigid. Sometimes you have 2 points, sometimes you have 4. Nobody cares. But roughly 3 is what people tend to remember. So
Yeah. Can you talk about when we're actually making some of these points? And you alluded to it a minute ago, where you said, well, you can have 3 points under 3 points, and maybe it's evidence and facts and statistics, but just the sort of the value and the place for objective evidence versus subjective evidence.
yeah, great question, Bob. So if you're doing a longer talk, not just a 1 minute, talk with the client, if you're doing more of a 5, 10, 20-minute talk, I recommend designing it. I call it audience-centric design. And that is going back to your curiosity about it. If you've done your due diligence and you really understand where people are coming from, what you do there is you just take yourself through a process. All right, given this client, given this customer, what are their main concerns? What are their main goals? What are their main priorities? And just brainstorm those out. Get those down on a piece of paper, 6, 7, 8, 10, whatever. Whittle that down by combining ideas. And once you whittle that down, then rank it from most important to them, not you, to them, to least important. And then you come up with this really cool structure that is tailored for that specific audience. So the first thing out of your mouth is exactly what's on their mind. I mean, it is, talk about being a breath of fresh air. It's like, oh, you're going to make this all about me? Fantastic. Have at it. What do you got? So audiences love that. So then once you get that overall structure correct, then you can use the structure within the structure. So for each of those main points, you can almost treat them like their own little presentation. So given this topic, I'm going to talk about this, this, this. And then with those points, you can flesh those out with, I talk about going back to Aristotle. I don't want to get too complicated here, but Aristotle said you can have an argument based on logos, pathos, or ethos. Logos is logic, pathos is passion, ethos is ethics or credibility. And so I call it objective evidence, which is kind of leaning toward the logos, the logic type of evidence. And that can be facts and figures, charts, graphs, tables, even word clouds, videos. It's measurable, it's observable, it's provable. Can you manipulate it? Of course you can, but it's pretty straightforward for the most part. So I call that objective evidence. So with the 9 subpoints, you can flesh it out with objective evidence. On the other hand, you can also flesh it out with subjective evidence. And subjective evidence is you've got a sample size of 1. So you've lost your logic. You can't lean on logic here because you have it's one person's opinion, and it can be in the form of an example, a story, a testimonial, something like that, a quote. These are all subjective forms of evidence. So if you go back to Aristotle, I do think he was correct, obviously. I can't base that on logic, but I can base it on passion and or credibility. I've got the pathos and ethos. So what I say is if you're going to go the subjective route, which I find just as powerful, if not more powerful than the objective route, you have to have a tremendous amount of credibility or the ethos piece and or passion, like you really believe what you're talking about. So an example was, I gave you that Warren Buffett quote before, right? And I always ask my class, Warren Buffett has a tremendous amount of what? And everybody's like, money. Well, beside money, he has a tremendous amount of credibility. So we take this one guy's opinion as a fact because of its elevated credibility. Does that make sense?
Very much so. And, I come from a consumer insights background for the, 20 something years. And, a big piece of learning is we're pretty emotional critters who backfill a lot of our decisions with rational belief or some type of rational evidence to justify something that's more, as you say, might be more pathos driven, but I need some logos to protect my ego of why I made this decision, right? And so people are funny, but we are very emotional, and to just try and rely solely on logic is two-dimensional at best. It's very black and white, and it really misses the human element. And we can get excited about things that we may not have a lot of evidence for, but we just
absolutely. And I say, Bob, mix it up. Throw in your statistics, facts, figures, but also weave in a story which has an emotional appeal, which is the pathos, which you're talking about, or weave in an example with details, a real example, not a hypothetical, philosophical one, but something where here's what really happened, and people walk away with these things, and it's a very persuasive way to speak. But I say mix it up. Why not?
Well, on the ethos part, there's a sales technique, if I can use that word in a nice way, where it's the customer has an objection. So say it's the CFO, you're trying to get budget on something. It could be your spouse or where you go to dinner tonight. It could be whatever it is that you're trying to communicate and persuade is feel, felt, found. And you've been in sales for a long time, so I suppose you might know this one, but it's validating their feelings first. That costs too much money. Mike, I totally understand how you feel. So I heard you. And in fact, we have a number of our other CFO clients initially felt the same way. So you're validating it. So you're not the only one. You're not crazy. Right. But what they found was that the ROI for this, the whatever the higher proof point is, and again, that may be subjective or objective evidence.
Exactly.
Right. They were happier, or they made more money. Like, well, okay, well, which one? But I understand how you feel. Warren Buffett felt the same way, but what he found was, well, Warren Buffett's in of one. It's not like the whole world, or there's this giant body of evidence. But here's a credible person. But feel, felt, found is a very interesting way to acknowledge what the other person is saying and to be empathetic to, I'm not all the way with you yet, but I'm listening.
Absolutely. And the byproduct of doing the feel and felt part well, which is leaning into that curiosity, really actually genuinely caring, really trying to understand where they're coming from. The byproduct of that due diligence is credibility. People will see that you're sincere. They will see that you're a serious person. Then when you do go to provide the evidence via the found part, which is you can use statistics, facts, figures, and all that, or you can tell a story, or you can give an example, then they're much more likely to take that in, to your point, Bob. But if you didn't do that first piece, you don't necessarily have the credibility, even though you're going to throw a bunch of stuff at people.
Right.
So that's why you want to do that. Absolutely.
Now, you shared a formula with me on what creates an accepted fact with claims and evidence. Do you mind sharing that with folks?
Yeah, I say, we've talked about the structure, but now how do you actually prove what you're saying? And I say a claim plus evidence equals an accepted fact. I'll say that again. You make a claim, and then you provide evidence, and that becomes an accepted fact. And once again, the evidence it can be objective evidence or it can be subjective evidence. And you just, in my opinion, you want to get very good at both and just read situations. What's the appropriate What's this situation calling for? And sometimes it's to tell a story. Sometimes it's to give an example. Sometimes it's to reference a statistic, fact, figure, or a quote, like I did, with the Warren Buffett.
And so we spent a lot of time talking about the structure of the communication, but then there's the actual delivery, the performance, if you will.
Yeah.
Could you maybe offer some insight on that?
Yeah, you bet. I would say, the first thing I start with performance is let's talk about nervousness, because that's going to affect all your performance. So I always ask, who gets nervous here? And if everybody's hand doesn't go up in the class, I say, okay, your hand didn't go up. Come on up to the front of the class. They're like, oh, no, it went up. It went up. So we all get nervous. I don't know about you, Bob. I get nervous. I've known people that have been speaking for 40 years. They get nervous. So I put up in the class, I put up a poster of Gandhi and Abe Lincoln and JFK and Winston Churchill and Lady Gaga. I ask, what do these people have in common? Horrible stage fright, horrible nervousness. Really? So I say, if you get nervous, you're in good company. So don't just relax with it. And I don't want to go into too much detail with this, but I would say the biggest thing to mitigating nervousness is to understand people are thinking about themselves. They're not thinking about us, and they're thinking about themselves. So be generous, provide something of value. And I say, stop trying to perform, stop trying to entertain, and actually educate, give people something of value they're listening to so they can take something of value. And when you change your intention from performing or impressing to actually giving something, like we were talking, Bob, about generosity, the nervousness kind of evaporates. So there's a whole bunch of other things you can do for nervousness, but having that intention of, I'm here to serve, I'm here to be generous, in my experience, that kind of makes the nervousness just kind of evaporate.
Well, that's what I'm saying. If I'm not trying to impress, I'm not trying to perform. Your thing about people not thinking about you. I think this is right, but it's an Eleanor Roosevelt quote. It basically goes something along the lines of, you wouldn't worry so much about what people are thinking about you if you knew how little they do. So.
Exactly. Exactly. Oh, I'm going to take that for my class. That's awesome. I have one where it's when you're 20, you care about what everyone thinks. When you're 40, you stop caring about what everyone thinks. And when you're 60, you realize no one was ever thinking about you in the first place. So I would say, yeah, Mike Foley, demotivational speaker. Nobody cares about you. No, I didn't say that. Your loved ones adore you and care about you. Beyond that, though, we all got bigger fish to fry. We're all thinking about, how can I take this information and use it? So given that as kind of the foundation of the performance skills, then, we can get into the details of stance, eye contact, gestures, movement, all that. And I do go into that, but I spend on a 5-week course, I spend 10 minutes on that stuff. Why? Because really? I have found 10 minutes. And the reason being, yes, obviously there's certain things you want to do with performance skills. But what I have found is, if you are organized internally and you have the right intention, this stuff starts happening naturally. Like, this weird gesture I just did like this, I didn't plan that. So I say, don't think about your gestures. Don't think about this stuff. If there's something annoying for us, we'll point it out for you to stop doing that. But what I have found is, if you are really invested in your audience, taking away your message and giving them something of value, your eye contact, your gestures, your voice inflection, all of this starts kind of falling into place naturally. And that's what connects with an audience. So,
okay. So rule of 4, we talk about the 4 C's, which is convictions, which is authenticity. This is what I truly, truly believe. I've got conviction about this. Leads to clarity. So kind of blocks out the stuff that isn't important, it's lesser or just not true. So convictions lead to clarity. Clarity leads to confidence. When I genuinely believe, I sit up straighter, I modulate differently, I make better eye contact, I smile. I'm not rushed in what I'm trying to do. I'm not making up answers that I hope this is what you want to hear. but I'm
Yep.
confident. And the fourth C in that is confidence is contagious. When you
Yep.
believe, you make me believe.
Yep.
And when it's not grounded in conviction, it's like, well, what does this person want me to say? Like I'm trying to guess what I think the right answer is for her instead of what I know is true for me. And she may
Mhm.
accept or reject my conviction. That's a different topic. But
Yep.
at least I'm being genuine and speaking from a place of conviction. I own my answer here. I own my presentation. And
Mhm.
that's what leads to that confidence, which is
Yep.
what dials off the nervousness because you've taken the pressure off because no is an acceptable answer.
Yeah. And you're just there to serve. Absolutely. I really like that. That's awesome. So going back to the confidence, it's a zero sum game, is what you're saying, Bob. Zero sum game, meaning if I'm confident, you'll be confident. And one of the things I say in the class is you have to understand if you're up here miserable doing the presentation, we are miserable as your audience. If you're up here, it's harsh realities in the class. If you're up here confident and actually enjoying the process, we're enjoying the process. If you're up here pretending that you're having a good time, but you're miserable, we're miserable. All right. So it's like a zero sum game. And I say, if, I'll take Bob here. So Bob is
Uh-oh.
going to come up and give a talk to the class. At the end of his talk, we're all going to get quizzed on his content. And what we all get on that quiz as an average is the average percent that Bob is going to get of his salary for the next 12 months. So I'll say that again. So however we do on that quiz, Bob, is going to be that percent of your salary that you're going to get for the next 12 months. So instantly people start laughing because how would Bob speak if that was the case? And what would happen, Bob, is just you'd be so into making sure the audience, no, listen, you got to get this piece. And that desire, that intention of really wanting the audience to understand where you're coming from drives your gestures, your voice inflection, your eye contact.
Mhm.
And you are so not thinking about yourself. You are really thinking, like I just said, really, I didn't want to do that. Really wanting your audience to get it. And I personally think that's what takes someone from a good speaker to a truly exceptional speaker. And it's not about not having a couple of ums or ahs or yes, we want to minimize those things, but it is about people walking out with your message. And if we walked out with your message, Bob, and you had 10 people there, your idea is magnified by 10 people, 100 people, 1,000 people, 10,000 people. And that circles back to what we started the conversation with is your professional powers. How powerful are your ideas getting across to the audience? And are they walking out with these ideas? And that's the thing that we if we can really focus on that, that's the thing that's going to really make a difference for each of us.
Well, I can't think of a better way to put a bow on that. And I like how you said that with that's our power. And you
Yeah.
can own it and everybody can own it. You're good at something. And now how do you bring those emotional intelligence skills to communicate and persuade to advance what you believe?
Authentically and bring what you have to offer in a generous way so people can take it in. It's blocking and tackling.
No, but it's all good. I mean, this is what I love about what you're sharing, and why I'm so happy to have you on. Is
Mhm.
kind of on the ethos side of this. Those are good qualities. There's no ill will. There's no selfishness. There's no what do I get out of
Manipulation.
this?
Yeah.
It's grounded in.
People pick up on that, Bob. They absolutely do. So
Well, you might win in the short term
yep.
sometimes, but in the long run, the person who's adopting the model that you're advocating, yeah, I think I'm old enough now to see that that's who ends up winning the game.
Absolutely. And while we have all been out there in the world a long time, I mean, kids pick up on this, Bob. I mean, 5-year-olds understand authenticity. I mean, that's and we haven't lost that as adults. It's still there. So I don't think you get away with those manipulative techniques that are being taught in certain circles. Let me give an example. So you know, 20 years ago, I was, a long day, I taught a class, and I picked my daughter up. And at the end of the day, after talking all day, it's just, I can barely get a sentence out. And I picked my daughter up, Megan, and we're driving along. And I'm like, hey, Meg, how was your day? Good, good, good. How was your teacher, Miss Honey? Good, good, good. How's recess? Good, good, good. How's your friend Sally? Good, good, good. And she interrupts me, Bob, and says, Daddy, you keep asking questions and you're not listening to anything I say. And I was like, oh, so busted by a 6-year-old, and because I wasn't being authentic, I was just asking questions and not really listening. And so my point is, if a 6-year-old can pick up on manipulation or techniques like that, then we can as adults. And so it comes back to that authenticity once again.
Curiosity, authenticity, seek to help. Those sound like good life lessons to me that might find their way into a PowerPoint at some point or into a talk. But,
hey, and you just did right there, Bob. Very good. Very good.
I can't help it. So this has been wonderful, Mike. Thank you so much. If people want to learn more about Clarity Central, how do they do that?
Just go to my website, www.claritycentral.net. And everything's right there.
Cool. And we'll put that up on the screen. There we go. So claritycentral.net. I can't strongly recommend enough engaging with you and the things that you're teaching people. I've learned a lot, and plus you're just a nice person. So it's been great to spend some time with you. Good luck with sailing. That's exciting. And I'll look forward to seeing some notes along the way about an amazing trip.
All right. Sounds great, Bob. Thanks for your time.
Thank you. Thanks, everybody, for listening today. And tune in next week when we've got another amazing guest coming. But I hope you have a wonderful and blessed week. Thank you. I know you're gonna find it. You've got all